Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
Matilda turned off the computer and wearily rested her head on her palms on the desk. She had once again stayed late at the office. There was no one else left in the building except for the security guard, the elderly Ignacio Carrasco. If someone had told her 6 months ago that she would be wasting time just to avoid going home, Matilda would never have believed it. But today, that's exactly how it was. Matilda loved her apartment very much. It was spacious, with 3 rooms, and freshly renovated. She and her husband Emilio had carefully planned every detail, from ordering furniture to plumbing fixtures. They even put a lot of thought into choosing wallpaper for the rooms. It was a very pleasant time for Matilda, reminiscing about the renovation period. Matilda and Emilio had eagerly awaited their cozy nest for a long time. After their wedding, they lived in a rented apartment, saving every penny for a down payment. They had to tighten their belts and make many sacrifices. But the couple never lost hope. They knew what they were saving for. Matilda's mother was the only one who supported her financially. She lived in the village and earned barely enough for utilities, food, and medicine. No one else helped them except her. Emilio's parents had divorced when he was around 13, and his younger sister Sylvia had just started going to school. His father, Salvador Lozano, quickly started a new family. In fact, he was the one who proposed divorce, as he had fallen in love with a colleague. They now had a daughter together, another younger sister for Emilio, whom he hardly knew. Salvador not only paid child support but also frequently gave gifts to his son and daughter and covered their extracurricular activities and courses. He wanted to be close to Emilio and Sylvia, but Vicenta Lozano was too offended. She prevented her ex-husband from meeting their son and Sylvia, and she turned the children against their traitorous father. Emilio used to say that during his teenage years, he hated his father. His mother had successfully shaped a negative opinion of him. But as he grew older, Emilio began to understand and look at many things differently. He loved his mother but realized she had a difficult personality. She always wanted to be in control, demanded absolute obedience, and kept tabs on everyone. Emilio eventually moved out when he became more independent. He enrolled at the university, found a job, and rented a room. He explained to his mother that it was more convenient for him to commute to the university in the mornings. He also resumed contact with his father. At first, Vicenta labeled her son a traitor, thinking he could have stayed with them, keeping their finances intact. They were much needed, especially since Sylvia, her beloved daughter, was now in high school and required tutors and preparation for college. Plus, teenagers didn't dress in cheap clothes from the market. But Emilio remained steadfast, and Vicenta eventually accepted it. She even began to brag to her friends about her independent son. Emilio and Matilda met through mutual acquaintances and immediately liked each other. Both had just graduated from university and started their first jobs in their respective fields. Emilio worked as a lawyer at the local oil company, while Matilda was an accountant at a construction firm. Matilda was drawn to her future husband's kindness, infectious sense of humor, and sharp intellect. Emilio, on the other hand, was captivated by Matilda's deep, aquamarine eyes and her uncharacteristic modesty and gentleness. The young couple started dating, and with each passing day, they became more convinced that they were meant for each other. So, when Matilda received a marriage proposal from her beloved approximately a year after they met, it didn't come as a surprise. Matilda's mother was happy for her daughter, but Vicenta thought it was too soon for Emilio to get married. Why the rush? She said when Emilio and Matilda came to her to share the joyful news. You haven't even settled down properly yet. I've been renting an apartment for a while now. We'll live there, Emilio reminded her. Sylvia will be starting college soon, Vicenta blurted out. That's when Matilda realized the true reason for Vicenta's displeasure with Emilio's marriage. Vicenta didn't want to lose her son's financial support. She worked as a cashier at the local theater and earned very little. Her ex-husband's assistance and her son's support made up the majority of her small family's budget. And now, with Emilio getting married, he would, of course, be spending money on himself and his wife. She can go out less and study more, then she'll get into college, Emilio smiled. Vicenta pursed her lips in dissatisfaction but remained silent. The wedding was modest but very beautiful. Emilio wanted to spend all his savings on the celebration, but his father gave him a generous gift and covered all the wedding expenses. Save your money for the apartment, Salvador advised. Or take a trip to the seaside with your young wife. That's important too. Vicenta found out about this generous gesture at the wedding itself and made an unpleasant scene. So, you have no money to pay for our daughter's college preparatory courses, but you can throw it all away on a day of celebration and forget about it. She angrily accused her ex-husband right in front of the embarrassed bride, who wished to sink into the ground. It was awkward to realize that her wedding had become the cause of a scandal. Salvador noticed that Matilda was upset and tried to calm his furious wife, but she wouldn't be appeased. Vicenta, why do you always want to blame me? Her father-in-law finally said. You're the one spoiling our daughter, indulging her in everything. I already paid for her courses 6 months in advance, and she dropped them, and you supported her. And now it will be the same. She changed her mind. Vicenta defended her daughter angrily. She decided that she's interested in psychology now. So, why should I try to persuade her? Force her to get an uninteresting profession? Salvador just waved his hand. After the wedding, Vicenta and Sylvia often visited the newlyweds. Matilda always welcomed them warmly, pouring coffee and offering something delicious to eat. Even when she longed for some rest after a long workday, she sat with her new relatives and engaged in conversation. Mostly, these conversations revolved around gossip and recipes. Vicenta also loved to praise her daughter. She was intelligent and beautiful, boys chased after her, a dazzling career and a wealthy groom were in her future, according to Vicenta. Matilda would nod in agreement. Sylvia was indeed a very attractive young woman. As for the rest, she was capricious, spoiled, demanding, and believed that everyone around her should cater to her wishes, including her mother, who couldn't keep her family intact, her treacherous father, and even her older brother. Matilda longed for a blissful family life, which, of course, required a good relationship among all family members. So, she tried her best. Emilio often returned from work late, usually tired and hungry. Serve your husband some soup, Vicenta immediately ordered, throwing sympathetic looks at her son. Look how exhausted he is. It's not like he's shuffling papers in an office from 9 to 5. Her mother-in-law was clearly implying that Matilda had a less demanding job. But he works in an office too, Matilda finally couldn't hold back one day. Oh, don't even compare it, Vicenta said, shaking her head. Emilio has a higher ranking position, and he earns more money. They're not given away just like that. Somebody else in Matilda's place might have been offended, but she remained silent. Her mother had instilled in her a deep respect for elders. Sometimes, this attitude made it challenging for Matilda to put rude people in their place. Like it happened right now. Overall, Matilda's relationship with Vicenta was somewhat strained, but there were no open arguments or scandals. Matilda considered this an achievement. Several years passed, and the couple managed to save up the necessary amount for a down payment. They finally had their own apartment, spacious, bright, with a wonderful view of the city park from the window. Emilio and Matilda were overjoyed with their cozy nest and enthusiastically began renovating and furnishing it. They didn't have enough money for everything right away, but the couple didn't lose heart. They gradually purchased construction materials, furniture, and fixtures. And then it was time for the little details, like curtains, sofa cushions, and lamps. Their mothers, however, couldn't help financially. One struggled to make ends meet, while the other pathetically claimed that she was the one raising her daughter, conveniently forgetting the substantial support from her ex-husband. But Salvador made a lavish gift to the young couple, a furniture store voucher. With it, they could afford a living room set and a beautiful kitchen. Matilda and Emilio were very grateful to their father-in-law. It's nothing, he smiled. I'd like to help more, but I can't. You two have done well on your own. You can be proud of yourselves. Of course, Vicenta was invited to the housewarming. She looked around in amazement, clearly impressed by the apartment's size. Why do you two need such a huge place? She asked her son. It will cost a fortune in utilities, not to mention the mortgage. It's fine, we can handle it, Emilio assured her. I was promoted at work, so my salary is higher now. And we won't be just the two of us for long. Finally, we can start thinking about having children. Matilda smiled. They had decided not to tell anyone yet, but a few days ago, Matilda had a positive pregnancy test. She was already carrying a baby in her heart. It was their little secret. However, a few months later, the couple happily shared the news with Vicenta after an ultrasound confirmed that everything was fine with the baby. They even found out the baby's gender, a girl. Oh dear, Vicenta shook her head disapprovingly when she learned that her granddaughter would be born in June. A girl. Emilio probably wanted a son. Stop it, Emilio interrupted. I didn't really care whether it was a daughter or a son. The most important thing is that the baby is healthy. As for Matilda, the words of her mother-in-law didn't bother her in the slightest. She had grown accustomed to her character. It seemed that, despite Vicenta's constant nagging, Matilda was so happy about becoming a mother that she didn't pay attention to the minor inconveniences, like the elderly mother-in-law's grumbling. A healthy, sturdy baby girl was born right on schedule. Matilda and Emilio joyfully embraced their new parental responsibilities. They decided to name their daughter Ariel. Of course, Emilio's mother was dissatisfied with the choice of name. Why not Toya? She asked angrily, looking at the young parents who had just shown her their baby's first document, the birth certificate. Because we both like the name Ariel, Emilio simply replied, cradling the newborn daughter in his arms. My mother was named Toya. She wanted a girl with that name in our family. You know that, Vicenta said, almost in tears. Why did you name your daughter Sylvia, then? Matilda couldn't help asking the logical question. Because at that time, my mother was still alive, and we had a big fight, declared the mother-in-law. She added, and why aren't you swaddling the child? You should wrap her legs tightly, otherwise, they'll become crooked. Matilda remained silent. Vicenta was once again trying to take control of everything. Enduring her criticisms became increasingly difficult, especially since the elderly woman, finding no resistance, ceased to restrain herself and carefully choose her words. When Emilio was around, Vicenta tried to play the role of a kind angel, offering valuable advice out of love for the children. It wasn't always successful, but at least she pretended to be friendly. However, when Emilio was at work, the mother-in-law showed her true colors. After Ariel's birth, she started coming to their home frequently under the pretext of helping with the newborn. You're young and inexperienced, you don't know anything yet. You will ruin the child's life, she used to say. Vicenta persistently made her tired daughter-in-law boil water for bathing the baby and iron both sides of the diapers. Matilda contemplated standing up to her mother-in-law, but she was afraid of offending the elderly woman. After all, she probably acted with good intentions. It was just her difficult personality. Plus, she didn't want to upset Emilio. He loved his mother, no matter how troublesome and domineering she was. Vicenta practically moved into their apartment. Matilda was on the verge of a confrontation. If their relationship suffered, so be it. She couldn't bear this total control anymore. However, the situation unexpectedly resolved itself. The mother-in-law started coming over less frequently, and then she disappeared altogether. It soon became clear that it had to do with Sylvia. She was expecting a child with a fellow student and needed to prepare for a wedding urgently. Matilda genuinely celebrated this turn of events. Why wouldn't she? Now Vicenta was entirely focused on her daughter. What a relief it was. The young couple had a luxurious wedding. The groom's parents spared no expense, and Vicenta even managed to gather a decent sum from her ex-husband for the celebration. Didn't he pay for your wedding? Well, he should make an effort for his daughter, Vicenta said when she dropped by for a moment. She had come to ask Matilda and Emilio for decorations for the car, which they still had from their own wedding. Vicenta didn't seem particularly interested in her granddaughter, Ariel, who had already started walking and trying to speak. The grandmother spent only 10 minutes with her before she hurried away. Now, she was no longer concerned about the fact that the child played with the wrong toys and ate unhealthy food. Vicenta had more important matters to attend to. The celebration truly unfolded with royal splendor. A luxurious restaurant, expensive decorations, a popular local host, invited artists, and over 100 guests. Vicenta felt and acted like a queen mother. "So, did we organize a good wedding for our daughter?" she asked Matilda, proudly surveying the elegant interior. The wedding dress alone cost a fortune. "Yes, indeed, everything is very beautiful," Matilda sincerely admired. "And the bride looks stunning in it. Sylvia is such a beauty." "That's because my daughter deserves only the best. Her married life begins in an elite restaurant, not in a third-rate diner," Vicenta declared. Matilda looked away. Her mother-in-law was clearly hinting at the difference between their wedding and Sylvia's, which had been much more modest. After the wedding, Sylvia moved in with her husband's family, and a new era of Matilda's relationship with Vicenta began. She once again visited her daughter-in-law frequently, sometimes with a gift for Ariel, but more often without, bearing a load of news instead. "Can you imagine how much trouble my poor Sylvia has to endure because of her mother-in-law?" Vicenta complained, comfortably settling on the kitchen sofa. She commented that the plates weren't washed properly. "And she insists on cleaning the bathtub from hair after herself because, you see, her long hair clogs the drain. She just doesn't understand that Sylvia has beautiful hair." Matilda nodded in agreement, wondering why Vicenta didn't notice that she was treating her the same way her mother-in-law treated her daughter. And now, she didn't have to wait long. The mother-in-law cast a critical eye on Ariel, who was running around barefoot and couldn't resist making a remark. "Why isn't she wearing socks? She'll get sick. Put socks or slippers on her right now." Matilda silently complied with the request. It might seem like a trifle, an innocent remark dictated by the grandmother's concern for her granddaughter. After all, this was a woman from a different generation with different rules during her child-rearing years. But the thing was, in the hour that Vicenta spent with her daughter-in-law, she had managed to criticize her for being slow, staying on maternity leave too long, being untidy, pointing out stains from spilled porridge on the stove, and being wasteful, noticing the price of the new nightlight in Ariel's room. Now she had seen that the granddaughter was barefoot. Ironically, Sylvia inherited a mother-in-law who had a very similar character to her own mother. Later, it became clear that her husband also took after his mother, equally capricious, spoiled, and convinced that everyone should have helped him. In hindsight, there was nothing surprising about this. Mothers with identical personalities raised similarly infantile children. Thankfully, Vicenta had chosen Sylvia as her favorite child, not Emilio, or else her son might have grown up just as spoiled as her daughter. Emilio, on the other hand, took after his father, Salvador, much more, and Matilda was thankful for that. Unlike his mother, Salvador visited less frequently, but he genuinely enjoyed his time with his granddaughter, spending hours playing with her. The little one adored her cheerful, kind-hearted grandfather and happily rode on his back along the long corridor. Salvador never came empty-handed and often lamented that work took up too much of his time, preventing him from seeing his loved ones as often as he would have. Sylvia's pregnancy was difficult. Vicenta shared such detailed information with Matilda that it made her uncomfortable. Why did she need to know all of this? Did Sylvia herself consent to her mother sharing such personal details? Sylvia had been hospitalized several times, and the threat of premature birth was constant. Vicenta worried, and Matilda couldn't help but feel sorry for her in these moments. No matter how difficult Vicenta was, you wouldn't wish for anyone to worry so much about their daughter. "They won't even let me in there," Vicenta sobbed. "I can't see my daughter often. When I come, they don't say anything. But her mother-in-law is dissatisfied, purses her lips, and looks at me coldly. And one time she said that young people these days are weak and fragile. They give birth almost in the field and immediately return to work. She's hinting that my Sylvia is defective and that she can't bear children properly. Do you understand? Matilda understood like no one else. She still had vivid memories of her mother-in-law's behavior during her own pregnancy. She criticized everything, from clothing to posture. She predicted she would give birth to a sick baby if she saw Matilda eating or drinking something she deemed unhealthy. She called her lazy because, during the final stages of pregnancy, Matilda didn't have the energy for cleaning and cooking, and Emilio took care of all that. Once, Vicenta, upon seeing her son with a mop, flew into a rage. "Have you completely turned your husband into a servant? What kind of man mops after a hard day's work? That won't do. And what have you been doing all day? Just lying on the couch?" Emilio's words about how it wasn't difficult for him and that Matilda wasn't feeling well fell on deaf ears when it came to the elderly woman. And now she was complaining to her daughter-in-law about Sylvia's mother-in-law, even reproaching Matilda for being indifferent. "Why are you so silent?" Vicenta couldn't hold back one day. "I'm pouring my heart out to you, telling you how they treat Sylvia in that family, and you don't say a word. So heartless." What could Matilda say? She fully understood Sylvia and sympathized with her. It's very hard when you're constantly being criticized. Remarks are irritating, make you nervous, and ruin your mood. But why didn't Vicenta, after seeing the situation from the other side, change her behavior towards her own daughter-in-law? Fate had given her a chance to understand just how unkind she was. And then Sylvia gave birth to a healthy, sturdy baby girl, whom they named Marta, not Toya, as Vicenta had hoped. Matilda expected a flood of indignation about this. After all, she herself had to endure a lot for daring to name her daughter Ariel. But for some reason, Vicenta genuinely admired the choice of name for her youngest granddaughter, as if she had never said that she wanted her granddaughter to be called Toya. Marta. It sounds so lovely, the mother-in-law rejoiced. It was Sylvia who came up with such a good name. The other grandmother wanted to name the child Dora after her late sister, can you imagine? But my girl showed character. So now we have Marta. She's being discharged the day after tomorrow, will you come? Of course, Matilda and Emilio went to welcome Sylvia from the maternity ward. It was such a joyful occasion. The pregnancy had been difficult, full of worries and dangers, but now it was all behind them. Fortunately, the baby was born healthy, and Sylvia felt well after giving birth. In the waiting room, Matilda had the opportunity to observe how Vicenta and Antonio's mother, Sylvia's husband's mother, engaged in verbal battles. They argued about every little thing. The specifics of caring for a newborn, the quantity and composition of purchases for the newborn, the responsibilities of the young mother and the new father, each of these issues sparked real confrontation. The women even managed to start a conversation about which grandmother, the maternal or paternal one, children usually liked more. Meanwhile, the grandfathers were peacefully talking about something in the corner. It turned out that Matilda's and Sylvia's mothers-in-law were also very similar to each other. Both couldn't stand conflicts and preferred friendly conversations over disputes and scandals. Each of the grandmothers tried to enlist her own grandfather as an ally, but the experienced men didn't succumb to provocations. It was even amusing to watch. But when Sylvia appeared with a pink bundle, wrapped in a lush bough, a real battle ensued between the grandmothers. Each of them wanted to be the first to see their granddaughter's face and hold her. Even the hired photographer had to calm down the enthusiastic grandmothers and remind them that the focus should be on the young parents and the baby. Sylvia and Marta continued to live with Antonio's parents. Her husband's salary as a young professional left much to be desired. Sylvia hadn't worked a single day. First, it was her studies, and then taking care of the child. So, the mothers-in-law graciously allowed the newlyweds to live in their spacious apartment. She said, "They can't live in a tiny closet, can they? Can you believe it? Vicenta complained, feeling deeply offended. "She's hinting at our little apartment, isn't she?" The mother-in-law complained that her daughter-in-law practically didn't let her cross the threshold. Vicenta was willing to visit her daughter and beloved granddaughter every day, but, of course, the hosts didn't need a stranger constantly sticking her nose into their affairs. Unlike the tactful Matilda, they didn't hesitate to show it to Vicenta. Matilda involuntarily compared her mother-in-law's attitude towards Ariel and Marta. Their daughter with Emilio clearly didn't elicit the same warm feelings from Vicenta as Sylvia's child did. When Ariel was still a baby, Emilio's mother often came to help with her, but she didn't show any particular tenderness towards the infant, only criticisms and diagnoses. But she genuinely cared about Marta. She talked about the little granddaughter with admiration and love, boasting about her new achievements and claiming that a real prodigy had appeared in the family. Ariel didn't start walking until she was over a year old, but Marta is growing at an accelerated pace. She's only 7 months old, can you imagine? Vicenta proudly showed Matilda a photo of the charming little girl on her phone. "And she's almost talking already," says Mama. "And she loves me so much, you have to see it." Even though her own grandmother, despite living nearby, doesn't treat Marta the same way. The mother-in-law started visiting Matilda almost every day, complaining about how Antonio's mother tormented her daughter and turned her granddaughter against her. Matilda couldn't even imagine how one could manipulate a 7-month-old child, but Vicenta insisted that her daughter's mother-in-law was almost a witch. Then suddenly, Vicenta stopped visiting them so often. Matilda understood that there was some reason for her mother-in-law to stop burdening her with her problems and criticisms. A situation occurred that Matilda labeled a mother-in-law diversion. Perhaps Vicenta found new, more sympathetic and empathetic ears, or something distracting happened in her life. Matilda sincerely thanked fate for this respite, and, of course, she was curious to know what had happened. It turned out that Sylvia couldn't take her mother-in-law's attacks anymore. She had a big argument with Antonio, who didn't take her side, packed her things, put the baby in a travel bag with the essentials, and proudly walked out into the cold, dark night. She bid farewell to her detested mother-in-law, wishing her the best. Of course, Sylvia went to her mother's place. Where else could she go? Vicenta even rejoiced in her daughter's action, supported her, and praised her strong character, which didn't allow her to bow down to the new relatives. She said that they would raise Marta together, and everything would be fine. Vicenta also celebrated her victory. The eternal dispute with her daughter-in-law had finally come to an end. Now it was clear who Marta would love more. Of course, it would be her, the grandmother, on her mother's side. After all, the second grandmother, the one from Antonio's side, wouldn't even know. Vicenta certainly wouldn't let her through the door, no matter how much she hinted or begged. The elderly woman remembered those awkward moments when she was treated like an unwanted guest at her son-in-law's house. Now she would get her revenge. However, the second grandmother didn't rush to crawl on her knees to her granddaughter, Marta. She hardly even resembled herself because her daughter gave birth to the twins around the same time, and her daughter was entirely devoted to taking care of them. What a shameless woman! Vicenta complained about her son-in-law's mother. Grandchildren from a daughter are dear and beloved to them. They give them presents and spend so much time with them. But now we can forget about Marta? How is that even possible? A daughter's grandchildren are dear, and a son's granddaughter is cut off like a piece of cloth. It seemed that the outraged grandmother had already forgotten her intention not to let Antonio's mother cross the threshold, but she didn't show much enthusiasm for making amends. Now Vicenta occasionally dropped by Emilio and Matilda's place for a cup of coffee, claiming that she needed a little break from taking care of the infant. Marta turned out to be a very fussy girl, and she had even started walking. In general, they had their eyes on the child at all times. Sylvia was tired, so everything was up to the loving grandmother. How could she manage without me, my dear daughter? What would she do with such an unreliable husband and his nasty relatives? Vicenta would say. One day, Matilda asked her mother-in-law to watch Ariel. She needed to go to the dentist because she suddenly had a toothache. But Vicenta quickly packed her bags to leave. She clearly came to her son's house to relax and didn't want to babysit her elder granddaughter. It wasn't in her plans. So, Matilda had to take her little daughter with her to the clinic. She managed it, she was used to it. Then Antonio appeared out of nowhere. One evening, he simply arrived at Vicenta's apartment with a suitcase and declared that he wanted to live with his family, and he had every right to do so. Of course, Vicenta perked up with hope. Now she would take revenge on her son-in-law, who had been treating her daughter and herself so disdainfully. He would understand why they couldn't be treated with such neglect. But then Sylvia intervened. It turned out that she had missed Antonio very much. She had wanted to reconcile with him for a long time, but hadn't dared to take the first step. The young couple hugged tightly in front of the astonished Vicenta and kissed. There were no doubts left, the son-in-law would indeed move in with them. Sylvia had decided, so there was no other option. They had to accept it. Matilda learned all of this from Emilio. She called him in tears and told him about her troubles. She says she has to cook for 3 adults now, Emilio recounted. Antonio doesn't do anything around the house, he doesn't even take care of the child. He comes home from work and immediately starts surfing the net. Sylvia doesn't seem to be doing much either. Mother cooks and cleans up after them, and she even throws their laundry in the washing machine. She feels like she has to take care of 3 children. Why doesn't she put them in their place? Matilda wondered. She certainly can do it. She practically orders me around. Is Sylvia afraid of offending her? She bursts into tears at the slightest thing. She says nobody loves her and cries about how miserable she is. She's been weaving ropes with her mother since childhood. She has a talent for it. Some time passed, and Vicenta came to her daughter-in-law again. Matilda had already returned to work, so she usually had a lot to do in the evenings. The impeccable order in the house, as it used to be, was no longer there. Sometimes in the morning, they didn't have time to make the bed or wash their dishes. Of course, all of this did not escape the watchful eye of her mother-in-law. "Why have you completely stopped cleaning?" she asked. "Why don't you ask your son this question? After all, we both work now. We have a little daughter. So, we don't divide tasks into male and female categories. Everyone does what they can." "That's not right," Vicenta criticized. "Throughout history, cooking and cleaning have been a woman's responsibility." "Is Sylvia cleaning the apartment?" Matilda asked. "Does she manage both taking care of the little one and doing household chores?" "It's different." Vicenta sighed bitterly. "You got a great husband, and she got some breadwinners. He earns pennies and doesn't lift a finger at home. Their little daughter only irritates him. All he knows how to do is play games on his phone and criticize me." "To you?" Matilda was even more surprised by the audacity of Sylvia, her husband's mother. "What kind of criticism?" "He lives off everything ready, and she isn't satisfied with it. To me, right? If the soup is too salty or if I didn't iron his shirt properly." "You iron his shirts?" Matilda was increasingly astonished. "Of course. Sylvia is having a hard time. She hasn't fully recovered from her difficult pregnancy. He doesn't know how to do anything himself. So, I have to. He can't go to work in a wrinkled shirt, can he?" "You should kick them out so that they rent their own place," Matilda sincerely advised. "They've sit on your neck, and they don't want to do anything themselves. So, you'll keep feeding them. Why not? They're living quite comfortably as it is. Why should you put in more effort?" As for Sylvia's husband, I agree, and I would kick him out, but Sylvia loves this good-for-nothing. What did she see in him? The mother-in-law started visiting more frequently, and the complaints about the young couple became increasingly absurd. Sylvia and Antonio didn't value Vicenta at all. They ordered her around and treated her like a servant. Sylvia demanded that the grandmother take Marta for walks for several hours a day. After all, the young mother needed a break from her daughter. Moreover, the spouses had taken the only room with a large couch. Vicenta had to move to the kitchen. Sleeping on a narrow, hard cot was uncomfortable for the elderly woman, and her back started to hurt. And then it turned out that instead of returning to work, Sylvia was planning to take another maternity leave. One day, Sylvia and Antonio joyfully announced to Vicenta that she would soon have another granddaughter or grandson. They thought the grandmother would be delighted. Of course, this news did not please the woman. She tried to explain to the young couple that it was too early for them to become parents again. They hadn't achieved anything in life yet, and they had no financial stability. They couldn't even handle Marta on their own. "Do you want me to have an abortion?" Sylvia yelled. Antonio put on the appearance of a deeply offended person and silently left the room. He lacked the courage for a more manly gesture. He had no intention of seeking a job with a better salary. His current position suited him just fine. Here, nothing extraordinary was expected of him. He could quietly play computer games and chat online. Vicenta tried to influence Antonio through her mother. Setting aside her pride, she dialed her number and described the situation. "They're expecting a second child. We're all cramped together in this one-bedroom apartment. Your son doesn't want to look for a better-paying job, and they can't make ends meet with his current income. Do something about it. Either help your son with money or influence him to find a better job." To this request, she responded rather coldly. She had other concerns at the moment. She was helping her daughter raise her twins. Antonio's mother received unpleasant but, in essence, wise and correct words from him. They're old enough to decide if they want to have children or if they don't. They should figure out housing for themselves. We've done our part. We raised our son, gave him an education, and held a wedding. Now he should settle down on his own. He's not a child anymore. Yes, but he's settling down at my expense, Vicenta tried to convey to her. "Well, that's not my problem," she replied. "You invited freeloaders into your home, now deal with it. If you want, kick them out. They'll get on their feet faster. It's your choice." Vicenta, in tears, told Matilda and Emilio about this conversation. There was no one else she could complain to. "In principle, she's right," her son noted. "When we were the same age, we didn't rush to have children. We worked and rented an apartment. We saved for a down payment. What's stopping them? You should tell them to leave." "But how can I kick out my own flesh and blood?" Vicenta looked at Emilio with sad eyes. "Sylvia will get upset. Besides, she'll be lost without me, with such an unreliable husband." "She won't be lost," Emilio confidently stated. "And her husband will get his act together. Well, either that or he won't be able to handle the hardships and will leave. Either way, it's better than the current situation." "But she won't leave," Vicenta sighed. "She has a share in the apartment, and she told me that a few days ago." Complaints about Antonio became more serious. He started to be rude to Vicenta, openly argued with her, and demanded money for their granddaughter's expenses. Sylvia supported her husband in everything. She believed that Vicenta should have fed them, taken care of their daughter, and even been happy that the young family was living with her, brightening her lonely life. "What would you do all day alone?" Sylvia smiled. "But this way, we're nearby. You see how your granddaughter is growing up. It's such a great joy. Just imagine how many lonely old people envy you right now." Sylvia had lived with her mother almost the same way as before getting married. She didn't cook or clean. Sometimes she took her daughter for a walk, but mostly she was talking in her numerous online chats and constantly sending messages to someone. She had a very active virtual life and a crowd of online friends. Emilio tried to talk to his sister and her husband, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Both of them believed that everyone owed them the rest of their lives. One day, after another complaint from Emilio's mother, Emilio threatened Antonio. He told him that if he was rude to Vicenta again, they would kick him out of the apartment. That same evening, Vicenta called her son. Matilda thought she wanted to thank him for his support and care, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. She told me that I'm rude and uncouth and that I nearly ruined my sister's marriage, Emilio said, shaking his head in bewilderment. She asked me not to interfere anymore and said that she barely managed to dissuade Antonio from going to the police. He was planning to file a complaint against me. Perhaps it's best not to interfere, Matilda shrugged. It doesn't concern us. We're doing just fine. I feel sorry for my mother. She's lost all dignity. They've relegated her to the kitchen, taken her money, and used her like a servant. But what can you do if it seems like she's fine with the situation herself? If it were otherwise, she would have already kicked the freeloaders out. Matilda felt that Vicenta had become obsessed with the idea of her indispensability. She enjoyed having power over people. Even now, she was still in control of the situation. Sylvia and Antonio completely depended on her. Most likely, deep down, the mother-in-law was even pleased with the situation. Why wouldn't she be? Her daughter and her husband couldn't do without her, especially with a child. Moreover, there was now a pleasant halo of self-sacrifice surrounding her, a selfless mother giving herself completely for her daughter's happiness. Some more time passed. Sylvia was about to give birth to her second child. Marta had been moved to the kitchen, and her crib was placed next to her grandmother's couch. They explained it by saying that the baby would be born soon and that the future mom needed to rest a little before the upcoming sleepless nights. But Marta was such a restless sleeper. She needed to take her to the potty in the middle of the night or give her some water. The already exhausted Vicenta was now completely drained. She used to get some sleep, albeit not much. In the mornings, her back and neck would ache from sleeping on the hard couch, but she could endure it. Marta was always by her side. She didn't want to sleep in her crib, and almost every night she climbed onto the already narrow kitchen couch with her grandmother. Sylvia and her son-in-law had more demands than ever. For some reason, they decided that Vicenta should buy a stroller and a crib for the newborn. They assigned Salvador to buy an educational playmat. After all, an uncle should give something to his nephew. But in all her life, Ariel hadn't received even a cheap chocolate bar from her aunt. It seems like Sylvia and her husband have lost their minds. Salvador sadly shook his head when he came to visit Ariel. They've landed on your mother's shoulders and are just hanging there. And she looks awful. They've taken over her place. She barely gets to see her granddaughter. Have you seen her lately? She used to visit us often. Now, it seems like she's disappeared again, Matilda replied. Maybe she's too busy. Sylvia has a tight grip on her now. She was always the only one who could get through to Vicenta. And then what Matilda later regretted happened. She wished she could go back in time and firmly say no. At least offer a different kind of help, but not agree to Vicenta's request. One evening, her mother-in-law appeared at her son's apartment. She looked, of course, not great, pale, thinner, tired, even haggard. Without her usual makeup and hairstyle, she seemed older than she actually was. There was sadness and weariness in her eyes. Matilda invited Vicenta into the living room, seated her on the couch, and poured her some coffee. How else could she respond? She had been raised to respect her elders. Besides, Vicenta's appearance invoked pity and concern. Matilda was even thankful for this life lesson fate had given her. After all, she had raised her own daughter. She was now drawing conclusions while looking at the fruits of her mother-in-law's upbringing. She overprotected her and permitted her too much, and where did it lead to? I can't stand living in my own apartment anymore, Vicenta began her sad story. I sleep in the kitchen on the couch. They've put Marta next to me. I cook for everyone, do the laundry, and clean up. I can't catch a break. I can't even meet up with my friends. I only occasionally drop by your place for 5 minutes because we live close by. Thanks for not kicking me out. At least I get some rest here. You're welcome to come anytime, Matilda said. I never thought it was so difficult for you. It's very tough. My son-in-law is lazy and rude. He works until 5, brings in peanuts, and has no intention of changing anything. He's comfortable with the way things are. He comes home, scatters his clothes around, and waits for dinner. He spends hours on his phone. That's not nice. And Sylvia isn't any better. Well, you can understand her. She's expecting her second child, hormones, and all that. But even she's going too far. She constantly compares me to her friends' mothers. They, supposedly, take care of the grandkids on weekends, and the young parents get to relax. I can't even give them a minute's break. All I do is work for their family. Sylvia forgets that her friends don't live with their parents, and they see their grandchildren only on weekends and not every time. My daughter is ungrateful. Something needs to be done about this. It can't go on like this. It's too much for you. Matilda sympathized sincerely with her mother-in-law. It was only later that she realized Vicenta was merely getting her into the right condition to achieve her goal. At the time, it seemed like the elderly woman was genuinely seeking sympathy. The situation had genuinely become complicated, and how could Matilda not support her mother-in-law? Yes, she could be demanding and controlling at times, but she had never done anything wrong to them. We must, Matilda, sighed her mother-in-law. I can't endure it there much longer. My heart is acting up, and my blood pressure is soaring. I went to the doctor, and they said I needed more rest. But how can I rest when there's such chaos at home? We're all crammed together here. They should rent an apartment. It's high time for them to become independent. Do you think it's that easy for them? Antonio is still a young professional earning peanuts. He doesn't want to do part-time work and isn't actively searching for a better job. And Sylvia won't let him. She says if he starts working more, their daughter won't see her father at all. But what's the point when Marta only sees him on the couch, glued to his phone? It's not very manly. I've told Sylvia the same thing, but she gets upset. She always says, "Mom, you are never satisfied. All you do is complain." At this point, Matilda tactfully remained silent. Sylvia was right about this. It was indeed an unpleasant trait in Vicenta's character to find fault with everything. She always thought she was right, and those who thought differently were either foolish or, at the very least, inexperienced. But I did find a way out, Vicenta continued. I found some part-time work for my lazy son-in-law. My friend's son works as a loader in a store in the evenings, and they need someone to pay well, so let him work with his hands. That way, they can save up for their own place. And did he agree? It doesn't seem like Antonio is inclined to work hard for the family's benefit. But where can he go? We had a big argument recently. I gave my son-in-law an ultimatum: either you move to a rented apartment within a month, or you're out of here like a cork from a champagne bottle. I told him to gather his things and leave. I can feed my daughter and the kids without him. I don't need the deadweight of a lazy son-in-law who also needs to be taken care of. Did you really say it? Yes, you know me. I can be firm when needed. And how did they react? Well, what do you think? They got offended, of course. Sylvia threw a tantrum, shouting that I was trying to ruin her happy family. She loves that layabout. He, too, got all defensive, accusing me of kicking out his own daughter, who's about to give birth. I had to remind him that the daughter would stay here. It's this good-for-nothing son-in-law who will go fend for himself if he doesn't shape up. You did the right thing, Matilda approved. Now, there's just a month left to endure, and the situation will resolve itself one way or another. That's the catch. In this very month, Vicenta sadly shook her head. The young ones are mad at me now. They give me hostile looks and mutter under their breath. But speaking about household chores, nothing has changed. I'm still doing all the housework, and I'm still sleeping on the kitchen couch. We're having more arguments than ever before. It used to happen before, but now it's happening out of nowhere. They blame me for everything. I can't stand being there anymore. Yes, it's not easy. So, I thought, Would you allow me to stay with you for this difficult month? Let Sylvia feel what it's like to manage the household and take care of the child without my help. Maybe they'll argue over domestic matters and go their separate ways, or, on the contrary, they'll come to their senses and mature. I feel like I won't be able to stay there with them for more than a week. Stay with us? Matilda hadn't expected this at all. Naturally, she wasn't thrilled with the idea. She could endure her mother-in-law's complaints and demands for an hour, but living with her for a whole month? Why not? Vicenta continued to lay out her thoughts. You have a big, spacious apartment, unlike our cramped space. You have a bedroom, Ariel has her own room, and there's no one in the living room. So, I can stay here for now. After all, I'm not a stranger, I'm the mother of the head of your family. And I'll help out wherever I can. I'll take Ariel to school and dance classes. Matilda contemplated. She needed time to weigh the pros and cons. But how could she tell Vicenta about it? She was convinced that her decision would be beneficial from all angles, and her mother-in-law was only asking to stay for a month, not such a long time. Declining her now? Vicenta would definitely get hurt, Matilda was certain of that, and she didn't want any unpleasant lingering feelings. She always preferred a good reconciliation over a big fight. Enduring a month of grumbling and nitpicking from Emilio's mother, well, that was an acceptable price for harmonious family relationships. After all, Matilda had long learned not to pay much attention to the many things her mother-in-law said. So, she would probably have to agree. All right, Matilda finally delivered her verdict. Of course, you can move in. There's plenty of space. You won't inconvenience us. Thank you. The mother-in-law rushed to hug her daughter-in-law. It had never happened before. Matilda inferred from this that Vicenta was truly having a tough time living in her own apartment. I'll come to your place tomorrow and let those freeloaders manage on their own. They were able to have children, they should know how to take responsibility, right? Of course, Matilda nodded. Very soon, the woman regretted her momentary weakness. Allowing Vicenta into her home was a mistake, and it wasn't just about her constant criticisms. Matilda quickly stopped feeling like the mistress of the apartment. Initially, Vicenta behaved perfectly. She sat quietly in the living room, watching TV, doing embroidery, or reading newspapers. She faithfully picked up Ariel from daycare, accompanied her granddaughter to dance class, baked pancakes for the family in the morning, and even gave compliments, something she hadn't done before. Your Ariel is such a smart girl. So calm and independent. Marta, on the other hand, we've spoiled too much, and she's often capricious. But Marta is still quite young. Ariel will be starting school soon, she's already a grown-up girl. No, her perfect behavior is entirely your fault. Well, and genetics, of course, played its role. When I was her age, I was just as smart, already knew how to read and count, and always obeyed my parents. At some point, Matilda even felt pleased that Vicenta had moved in with them. Firstly, their relationship had clearly improved. Secondly, it was so nice not to rush to pick up Ariel from daycare after work because her caring grandmother had already taken her. But this idyllic situation couldn't last forever. Very soon, Vicenta stopped trying to appear like the perfect grandmother and a positive person and showed her true colors. However, Matilda was mentally prepared for this. Why are you peeling the potatoes so thickly? It's not economical, you should make them thinner. You oversalted the soup again. And you need to use fewer spices for the sauce, it's not healthy. Why isn't Ariel asleep at such a late hour? So what if it's Friday? A child should have a routine. You didn't make the beds again this morning. Why did you get a cat? It's nothing but trouble. Hair is everywhere, and it smells. Besides, it can infect everyone with worms. And I'm allergic to cats, in case you forgot. Do you want me to leave your place this way? These and other criticisms poured out of Vicenta as if from an overflowing horn of plenty. She held back in front of Emilio, but he often returned home from work late. In those moments when her son wasn't at home, the mother-in-law tried to prove to Matilda that she was an incompetent housewife and a negligent mother. It was unpleasant, of course, but she could bear it. Matilda counted the days until the end of the agreed-upon month. Very soon, her mother-in-law would return home, and Sylvia could be in charge there. It seemed that Antonio had not succeeded in finding a rental apartment according to the initial plan. He couldn't hold down the part-time job that Vicenta had found for him. So, following Vicenta's original plan, the time for her son-in-law to pack his bags had come. The mother-in-law tried to establish her own order in her son's apartment. One day, when Matilda returned home, she didn't find a whole range of household cleaning supplies in the bathroom cabinet. These products were not cheap, and she ordered them from Sweden, but they made cleaning enjoyable and effortless. Matilda had long forgotten what it was like to scrub tiles for hours. All it took was to run a sponge soaked in a magical cleaner along the wall, and it started to shine with cleanliness. The woman couldn't wait to use her new cleaning supplies, but they were missing from the drawer. Of course, Matilda asked her mother-in-law about it. "Ah, that poison?" Vicenta quickly understood what was being talked about. "I threw it away. There is no need to use harmful chemicals. I've always managed with regular household soap. It's been tried and tested for decades. And you bought all these things, thinking they were great. These were very expensive and environmentally friendly products." Matilda nearly cried from frustration. How could someone behave so rudely in someone else's home, where they had been welcomed for a while? And they cost a fortune. "Please ask for my permission before throwing anything away in this house." "So that's how you're going to talk now?" Vicenta pursed her lips. "Are you hinting that I'm a freeloader? Trying to kick me out? Finding fault with me, so I'll leave myself? Just live here until the end of the month, as we agreed, but behave like a human being. You can't bring your own rules into someone else's house. You're so ungrateful. I'm raising your child and making breakfast in the mornings, and you treat me like this. I'm asking you, don't throw anything away in this house without my knowledge," Matilda repeated, going to her bedroom. "There isn't much time left until the end of the month. I need to try to keep my composure. Soon everything will work itself out." But Vicenta didn't listen to Matilda. She continued to act as the mistress of the apartment when her son and daughter-in-law were at work. And one day, Matilda returned home to find the refrigerator half empty. Frozen semi-finished products, frozen vegetable mixes, and dumplings from the store had disappeared from the freezer. And on the shelves, Matilda couldn't find Ariel's favorite yogurts and fruit curds, which had always been here in abundance. Of course, the woman immediately understood who was doing this and demanded an explanation from Vicenta. "You should thank me." She didn't seem embarrassed at all. "I threw away all those harmful products. Haven't you read the labels? I'm doing this for your sake, so you don't ruin your health. You eat all the wrong things. Listen to the elderly. All of this is just junk food, and you spend so much money on it. It's better not to be lazy and cook for yourself." Another time, when Matilda returned home, she found strange lace napkins on the shelves. The stylish interior of their apartment suddenly began to resemble the decor of some old country house. Matilda tried to remove the decoration, but her mother-in-law fiercely resisted. "What are you doing? These are so beautiful. My friend crochets unique items like these. Your place is so dull and gray. These little napkins liven up the decor. They're a special touch. It's my gift to you for hosting me." Matilda didn't even bother arguing, knowing it would be futile. The napkins would stay in their place. It was just one more needless argument. And it got worse. Soon, Matilda and Emilio's apartment began to feel like Vicenta's own home. The elderly women were sitting in the living room, drinking coffee, and talking quietly. They didn't seem to make any noise or cause disruptions, but Matilda couldn't relax after work with strangers in her home. Emilio hardly noticed what was happening. He came home late, tired, and hungry. Vicente tried to behave perfectly when he was around, and any complaints that slipped out were rare and easily passed off as friendly advice. When Matilda tried to explain the situation to her husband, her words didn't sound very convincing, and she knew it herself. It seemed as if she were nitpicking at the elderly woman for no reason. "Well, yes, Mom has quite a character. It's not easy to deal with," Emilio agreed. "But she wishes us only good things. She just doesn't express it very gracefully. Keep calm, it will take a bit longer, she'll be back home soon." A month passed. Matilda had hoped that the longed-for peace would finally come. Life would return to normal. There would be no more fear of your groceries ending up in the trash can. No more having to listen to complaints about every little thing. She could once again roam the house in a stretched-out comfy t-shirt, munch on chips in front of the TV, and leave the dishes unwashed until evening without worrying about being called sloppy or lazy. How easy and pleasant would life be without Vicente's scrutinizing gaze, always looking for flaws? But Matilda's dreams were not meant to come true. A month passed, and Vicente showed no signs of packing her bags. Matilda asked her husband to talk to his mother. She felt awkward starting such a conversation herself. Her mother-in-law already believed that her daughter-in-law was taking advantage of her. It turned out that nothing had changed in Sylvia's family over the past month. Antonio hadn't managed to save up enough money for rent. In fact, their financial situation had worsened. Without Vicente's help, the young parents had to enroll Marta in a private daycare center. There were no available spots in a regular one. Now, the lion's share of the family budget went towards paying for the preschool facility. Renting a place to live was out of the question now. Vicente tried to kick her son-in-law out of the apartment as initially agreed, but Sylvia protested once again. She stood up for Antonio vigorously and accused her mother of not being able to hold on to her husband and now envying her daughter's happiness. Her son also joined in with loud words. Vicente realized she was powerless in this situation, at least for now. The elderly woman hoped that after Sylvia gave birth to the second child, she would finally realize how unreliable her beloved husband was. With one child, they somehow managed to enroll Marta in a private daycare center, where she now stayed late in the evenings. But with a newborn, there would be more responsibilities and expenses. Only diapers cost a lot. Antonio wouldn't be able to handle these payments, and he definitely wouldn't be helping with the newborn. So Vicente reasonably concluded that the situation would resolve itself. Sylvia would get tired, realize that she had chosen an unreliable husband, and kick him out herself. Or perhaps Antonio would be the one to run away from the family troubles. Such an outcome couldn't be ruled out. And only then would Vicente return to her apartment when the lazy one's feet were no longer there. Matilda sighed. Sylvia was due to give birth in a month. That meant her mother-in-law was planning to stay with them all this time. And then who knows how long they'd have to wait for the situation with Antonio to resolve itself? It postponed their peaceful living indefinitely. But Matilda couldn't bring herself to kick the audacious Vicente out. Her upbringing prevented her from doing so. Sometimes, Matilda even felt like a complete fool for not knowing how to put people in their place. And she couldn't ask her husband to kick out his own mother either. Emilio would be caught in the middle. On one side, there was his mother, whose living conditions in her own apartment had become unbearable, and on the other side, there was his suffering wife. And so, Matilda decided to wait a little longer. Perhaps everything would work itself out naturally. But things only got worse. When Sylvia gave birth to a son, the young family found themselves in dire financial straits. They had to withdraw Marta from the private daycare, which was now beyond their means. Sylvia quickly found a solution. Every morning before work, Antonio dropped Marta off at Vicente's place. In essence, Emilio and Matilda's apartment had become Marta's new daycare center. Vicente wasn't thrilled with this situation either. "And now they've gotten to me," she complained to her future daughter-in-law one evening. "They bring Marta here. They don't want to take care of the kids themselves." "So why did you agree then?" Matilda asked. She didn't like the fact that there was now a young child in her apartment all day long. There were broken toys, crumbs everywhere, and the fingerprints of little hands on mirrors and tiles. She had gone through all of this with her daughter, Ariel, and it seemed like she could finally forget about these toddler problems. But no, now not only Vicenta but also little Marta were living in their apartment. How can I refuse them? Vicenta shrugged. Sylvia says that all grandmothers help with their grandchildren. And she's right, it's really like that. She said that if I refuse, she'll never consider me her mother again and won't let me see the grandchildren. That's just nonsense, Matilda sighed. She'll never be able to do without your support. She's just acting up. Matilda understood that she herself, just like her mother-in-law, couldn't assert her conditions, was afraid of a scandal, and that relations had deteriorated. Her mother-in-law allowed her capricious daughter to have her way, and now Matilda has obediently allowed Vicenta to impose her presence on them. The situation was at a standstill. Now Vicenta no longer went to pick up Ariel from daycare. She didn't want to bother with the little one. Moreover, she was relieved to hand Marta over to her daughter-in-law, as often when Matilda returned from work, the child was still with them, and the woman couldn't remain indifferent to the baby. After all, the little one needed to be looked after. It was just one step away from disaster. All of this was incredibly draining. Matilda even began to get angry with her husband for not doing anything to improve the situation. Later, it turned out that Emilio had tried to reason with his sister and Antonio. He had gone to them, tried to get through to them, called things by their names, but it hadn't led to anything. Only later did Sylvia call and complain to her mother about her brother, and as usual, the mother supported her beloved daughter. Emilio, once again, asked her not to get involved. He agreed but set a condition: they had to resolve the issue with Marta within 2 weeks. They'll give her a spot in daycare soon, just hold on a bit longer, she pleaded with her son and future daughter-in-law. You see for yourselves that the situation is hopeless. And then it became even harder. Emilio was transferred to another position that involved business trips. If Vicenta could somewhat restrain herself in front of her son, in his absence, she felt like the full-fledged owner of the apartment. And now these periods were happening much more frequently. One day, Matilda suddenly realized that when her husband was away on business trips, she preferred to stay late at work just to avoid returning to their own apartment. It used to be her cozy place and a quiet harbor to shelter from life storms. But now, Vicenta has completely taken over. Ariel was often picked up by their neighbor. The girl and her son enjoyed playing together, so it wasn't a burden for the woman. On the contrary, while the children were playing with their toys, she could take care of household chores, so there was no rush to get to the daycare. So Matilda found herself in the office, delaying her return and scolding herself for allowing such an absurd situation to happen. She didn't want to go home at all. Right now, her tired mother-in-law was taking care of the hyperactive Marta all day long. Toys were scattered everywhere, and many of them were probably already broken. Ariel would be upset again. How many times had Matilda asked her mother-in-law not to let the youngest granddaughter play with her daughter's favorite dolls, and she had even hidden them in a locked closet. But after trying to distract Marta for some time, Vicenta, of course, ignored these requests. The child was allowed to do anything. If Matilda had returned home on time, she would have had to take care of Marta for at least a couple of hours while waiting for Antonio, and with the tired mother-in-law's complaints and nitpicking, there was nowhere for her to escape. Lately, Vicenta has expressed dissatisfaction with her daughter-in-law staying late at work constantly and even coming up with some rather fantastical explanations for it. For instance, she genuinely believed that her son's wife had found a lover at work. If Matilda were to confess that she no longer felt at ease in her own home and thus didn't rush to return, her mother-in-law wouldn't have believed her. Vicenta sincerely thought that she wasn't inconveniencing the young couple. On the contrary, before they had Marta, she had even helped them with the child and never failed to mention it at every opportunity. Something needed to be done about this situation urgently. This couldn't go on like this. Emilio tried to reason with Vicenta, but he didn't get anywhere. He couldn't be too harsh and categorical with her. After all, she was his mother. Besides, he didn't see half of what Matilda had to endure. Her husband often worked late, and now there were these business trips on top of that. He was hardly ever at home. What could they do? They needed the money to cover mortgage payments. Unlike Sylvia and Antonio, nobody had provided them with housing. Matilda found herself stuck in the office again. The elderly janitor, Ignacio, entered the room. "I see the lights are on. I thought you might have forgotten to turn them off. It's not right, so I came in to fix it." "There's a lot of work," Matilda smiled. "Poor young people. They have to spend time away from their families to make a living. You're in quite challenging conditions. And you have a child, right?" "Yes, a daughter. My neighbor picked her up from a daycare today, so I'm not in a hurry." "A neighbor? So, your grandparents aren't helping you out? Or do you not have any?" Matilda fell silent. It was difficult to explain the situation in just a couple of words to someone she barely knew. Plus, it wasn't necessary. Ignacio probably asked out of politeness. "Well, I'm a lonely man," the janitor suddenly confessed, taking a seat on an empty chair. "That's why I'm still working. At least here, I get to interact with people." "You don't have a family?" "I had one once. A wife and a daughter. But my wife passed away 10 years ago, and Katerina left for the capital long before that. She's pursuing a career there and is quite successful. A big apartment, a car, and several trips by the sea each year. But she's turning 40 soon and isn't in a hurry to get married. She doesn't have children yet. Her mother didn't live to see them either. Katerina hardly has time for that, obviously. She calls once a month and on holidays. Well, she sends gifts, too, by mail. I send her gifts as well. That's the extent of our communication. That's sad." There was so much sadness and bitterness in Ignacio's words that Matilda, for a while, forgot about her own problems. She literally felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on this man. "That's how I live, alone like an owl. I have a couple of friends, of course, but they have wives, children, and grandchildren, all busy with their own affairs. They have to take their kids to daycare, pick them up from school, or take them to their country houses. And what about me? I come home, turn on the TV just to have some noise around, and there's no one to even exchange a word with. Why haven't you gotten married again?" Matilda asked. "I think there are plenty of single women your age around." "Well, I wasn't very good at meeting ladies, even when I was younger," Ignacio replied with a slightly embarrassed smile. "And now, I've completely forgotten how to do it. But I do crave companionship, attention, and care. I really want someone by my side." Suddenly, something clicked in Matilda's mind. Ignacio was suffering from loneliness in his spacious, empty apartment. Meanwhile, they were enduring inconveniences because their family had grown and Vicenta had nowhere to live. What if she introduced Vicenta to Ignacio? He longed to meet a significant other. And Vicenta wouldn't mind having someone to boss around. Ignacio would probably appreciate her decisiveness and assertiveness. He was yearning for someone to pay attention to him. With Vicenta, he wouldn't be lacking in that department. And if they didn't like each other, nothing would be lost. They could go back to how things were indefinitely. But it was worth a try. "You know, I think I might be able to help you," Matilda said, looking into Ignacio's eyes. "How?" he asked, surprised. "I have a mother-in-law. She's living with us right now. She's also alone. She divorced her husband a long time ago. Well, she probably focuses all her attention on her children and grandchildren," Ignacio nodded. "I know women like that. They usually don't have time for relationships. And I can understand them." If only Ignacio knew that Vicenta would gladly dive into a relationship, leaving the children and grandchildren to fend for themselves. She was tired of playing the indispensable mother and grandmother and was so exhausted that her daughter and son-in-law depended on her. Even her appearance had changed. She looked like a beaten-down horse, always disheveled and worn out. In the old days, she used to be well-groomed and put together, always with a fresh manicure and hairstyle. My mother-in-law is definitely not like that, Matilda smiled. She's ready for a relationship with a mature, decent man. By the way, here's her photo. Matilda showed Ignacio a photo of Vicenta from Sylvia and Antonio's wedding. In the picture, the elderly woman looked like an actress. Her mother-in-law indeed had a striking appearance and knew how to present her strengths. So, how do we meet then? Ignacio asked. I would really like to get to know her better. Here, we need to proceed carefully, not too directly, Matilda decided. If Vicenta found out that she was trying to set her up, she would resist meeting Ignacio and accuse her future daughter-in-law of trying to get rid of her by any means necessary. Ignacio, do you have social media accounts? Yes, my daughter registered me. I chatted with some old friends there. I also look at Katerina's photos, it's a relief. My mother-in-law also likes spending time on social media. Let me give you a link to her profile. It might be the easiest way to start a conversation. Just don't mention that I facilitated this. It'll be better that way, especially if things don't work out between you two. Got it, Ignacio nodded. I'll do everything you say. Thank you for the opportunity. You're welcome, Matilda smiled. I hope that soon there will be 2 more happy people in the world. Ignacio didn't waste any time and left several enthusiastic comments under Vicenta's photos that very evening. Later, while scrolling through the news before going to sleep, Matilda saw those eloquent and courteous remarks. Ignacio knew how to express himself gracefully. Who would have thought he was able to do it? Well done, Ignacio. Of course, Vicenta was really flattered to have a virtual admirer. Matilda could see that her mother-in-law was now frequently exchanging messages with him, smiling. Apparently, her communication with Ignacio was moving in the right direction. Vicenta had started taking care of herself again. Matilda no longer heard as many criticisms and complaints from her. Vicenta was now channeling her energy in a different direction. Life was clearly improving. Matilda hoped that Ignacio wouldn't stop halfway and would take a decisive step to propose living together. One evening, Vicenta, dressed beautifully and elegantly, slipped out of the house. Matilda knew that Ignacio had invited her on a date for the first time today. He had mentioned it to a colleague, even though she hadn't asked him about his personal life. Vicenta returned late. Matilda noticed with relief that Vicenta was in high spirits. She even complimented her future daughter-in-law. You're such a clever girl. You've already prepared dinner and tidied up. How do you manage to do it all? Matilda just smiled. She hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, she had always managed to do everything. But before, her mother-in-law had always looked for things to criticize. Today, she was all goodwill. Love truly works wonders on people. Of course, Vicenta couldn't help but like the polite and considerate Ignacio. Exhausted from loneliness, the elderly man had apparently displayed all his best qualities on their date and had clearly won Vicenta over. Their relationship was progressing rapidly. Now, Vicenta often left the house. They went to the theatrestral in the park, or sat in cafes together. Vicenta didn't hide the fact that she had a suitor, on the contrary, she proudly told everyone about him. He's so intelligent, he knows so much, and he speaks so beautifully, Vicenta shared her impressions with her daughter-in-law. Her daughter didn't understand, but Matilda listened with interest and approval. Mom, what kind of relationship can you have at your age? Sylvia wondered. You're first and foremost a grandmother, and you should be looking after your grandchildren, not going on dates. It's embarrassing. These are not just your grandchildren, but also her children, Matilda reminded her. And she spends much more time with them than their mother and father. You're right, her mother-in-law agreed with her for the first time. It's high time for you to become more independent. I love my grandchildren, and I love all of you kids. But that doesn't mean you can keep depending on me. You're trading your own grandchildren for some old guy. Don't talk about him like that. Vicenta sharply reprimanded her daughter. When you get to know Ignacio better, you'll like him too. Sylvia was offended and stormed out, slamming the door loudly. Don't worry, she'll calm down, Vicenta waved her hand nonchalantly. Matilda rejoiced. Finally, her mother-in-law had seen the light and put her daughter in her place. And then the long-awaited moment came. Vicenta announced that she was moving out. One day, upon returning home, Matilda discovered several packed suitcases in the hallway. What's this? The woman exclaimed in surprise. I'm moving out, Vicenta smiled. To Ignacio's place. I never thought that I could fall in love again at this age. Wow, Matilda exclaimed. I can hardly believe it myself. A truck will be here in an hour. Ignacio arranged it. He'll be here to help with things too. Are you happy about this? Matilda asked. I'm thrilled, Vicenta confessed. Her eyes were shining with genuine joy. I never thought such an option would be possible for me. Why not? Her future daughter-in-law smiled. You and Ignacio aren't that old. Thank you for everything. For providing a haven and for your patience. I know I can be unbearable at times. But you always held back and avoided conflict. I notice all of that, and I truly appreciate it. Matilda simply nodded. She had no intention of trying to convince her mother-in-law that she had been difficult. It hadn't been easy for her. True, Ignacio had worked a miracle. Lately, Matilda has even enjoyed talking to Vicenta. It turned out that she could be a wonderful conversationalist. Emilio will be surprised when he returns from his business trip, Matilda said, glancing at the suitcases. He has no idea about the changes in your life. Oh, he has, Vicenta smirked. He called me just a couple of hours ago. Sylvia told him that I was being lured into some kind of cult. She wanted her son to influence me. But I explained everything to him. Emilio is happy for me. Into a cult? Matilda couldn't help but smile. Well, yes. It's hard for her to accept that she's losing her free nanny. But now they don't have to rent an apartment, Matilda remarked. They can stay with you as long as they need to. They didn't seem to be planning to, Vicenta replied. It's fine, they're still young. They'll grow up and understand. Vicenta moved in with Ignacio. Now, every time they met, Ignacio thanked Matilda. Her mother-in-law had shown her best side and turned out to be an excellent hostess and a caring and attentive partner. Ignacio praised her personal qualities and culinary skills. He spoke of kindred spirits. He even seemed to improve and rejuvenate. Now, the man was no longer alone, and it clearly benefited him. Vicenta also talked about how happy she was. Matilda didn't recognize her mother-in-law. She had become an entirely different person. Apparently, her unruly behavior was a result of her unfulfilled personal life. Ignacio didn't mind having his beloved woman's grandchildren visit their home. On the contrary, he happily played with the little ones. But Sylvia and Antonio couldn't just dump their kids on their grandmother and new stepfather because Vicenta and Ignacio led an active life, traveling, going to theaters and museums, meeting with friends, and going on hikes. They rarely stayed at home. So Sylvia had to learn to be a mother to both of her little ones by herself. And she actually ended up enjoying it. Ignacio became a caring grandfather not only to Sylvia's children but also to Ariel. The girl loved visiting Vicenta and Ignacio's place. They always had gifts and treats waiting for her. Salvador also got to know Ignacio. The men immediately found common ground and even became friends. When Emilio returned from his business trip, Matilda told him everything. She didn't hide the fact that she had played a role in her mother-in-law's personal happiness. "You've really outdone yourself," her husband exclaimed sincerely. "Mom is radiant, and Ignacio is too. How did you manage to arrange everything so well?" Now we're free, and two people have found each other. You could say we've created a family. I don't know, Matilda shrugged. I just wanted everyone to be happy.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.